Just imagine with me. Let's forget the politics. Let's forget the price. Let's forget the drama. If we just imagine that Apple comes down from upon high and hands this thing to us artists, this is an object that is powerful. We have a new pen/pencil that has more creative ability. It's got an OLED screen. Did we mention that it is thinner and lighter? This is an object that is made for artists, for digital artists, two-dimensional artists. It is tailor-made for us, and it's made really, really well. On the one hand, it's just good to be alive when products like this are available, and it does feel like there is hope with technology and the way that it is going to support us as artists and allow us to create things in the future. This type of thing just wasn't possible when I started doing digital art, and there's something to appreciate about that. But then these things are expensive, and it seems like there's a little bit of a squeeze. We've got this new pencil that looks almost exactly like the old one, but it doesn't work with the old tablets. You have to buy another one, and there's just a lot of questions here about whether or not this is actually worth it. So in case it's not clear, I have with me here a brand new M4 iPad Pro. This is the 13-inch version. It's got 500 gigabytes of storage, and I have also the new pencil, the Pencil Pro, I think it's called. Anyway, the new one. And in this video, I'm going to do an initial impression and initial review from the perspective of being a professional 2D artist. How does this stack up? How does this help us as two-dimensional artists who are interested in drawing comics, illustrations, doing concept art for video games, etc.? I think the real question for me that I want to answer with this is, how does this product live up to the marketing expectations, the hype, and I guess what we would expect it to do based on its kind of technical specifications, etc. And more importantly, is it actually worth buying right now? So it's worth mentioning that this is not a review channel on the Drawing Codex. I don't do typical reviews of products. I don't have a lot of B-roll, but I am a professional artist. I've been using Wacom tablets for a long time, since the mid-90s, and I grew up on digital art. Also, keep in mind, as usual for a Drawing Codex video, this is probably going to be neither fast-paced nor heavily edited. I just want to tell you what I think of this product and really sort of get deep into how it's going to affect us as artists. So just hang out, we'll talk about whether this thing's any good, and hopefully that can help you figure out kind of where it fits in your life. So hopefully that sounds interesting. Hopefully you join me. Let's jump in and get started. Alright, welcome to the Drawing Codex. My name is Tim McBurney. I've been a professional working artist for over 20 years, and on this channel, we're all about drawing cool stuff from our imagination, embracing the challenge of drawing, and mastering the craft of line and color illustration. Now, if you'd like to learn more about illustration and picture making, you can check out my free illustration mini workshop. It charts my journey going from an amateur to a professional, and I talk a lot about really important issues such as how to get more detail and polish in your work, how to plan your images, create thumbnails, and also a few thoughts on how to approach being a professional artist. As I said, it's free. The link will be in the description. Go check it out if that's something you're interested in. Now, before we jump into the review itself, just a bit of context on me, because I think knowing the context of where a reviewer is coming from really helps. I'm not a proper sort of review channel. I'm just a professional artist, but I've been using technology forever, and I have a lot of experience with it. I also have Android tablets, I have Windows tablets, I've got laptops, I've got a whole bunch of PC workstations behind me, I've got Cintiqs, I've used Huion products, I've used a bunch of these things where we draw and we make digital art. But again, my sort of focus is much more as a professional, so the price is not quite as important. I'm really interested in, can this actually help me make better art? And that's kind of the perspective I'm coming from. But I'm also interested in the technology itself and kind of where it's going and how I think it will fit into and help artists be productive. So that's kind of where I'm coming at it from, right? I'm not claiming to be completely unbiased, but I'm going to try and really sort of look at this from as much of a pragmatic view as possible, right? And I guess it's also worth mentioning that, I spend most of my time drawing all the time on drawing screens. That's kind of what I do for a job. I'm not doing sort of YouTube reviews. I don't do embargoed reviews. I don't do paid reviews. I don't do affiliates. I don't do sponsorships. I don't do any of that. Everything I'm sort of showing you on this channel is stuff I've sort of bought by myself, and I'm actually going to use it for making art. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. Again, not a normal review channel. So what's actually new about this thing? What's special about it? Essentially, I think the things that probably are going to relate to us are that it is thinner, right? It is significantly thinner than the previous one. How much that matters is very sort of questionable. It is a little bit lighter as well. It feels super rigid, right? So often you're kind of worried about like, it's really thin. It feels really solid. It feels a lot more solid than probably sort of any other iPad I've owned. So I don't think you need to worry about it being thin and flimsy. This thing feels really, really solid. It kind of feels really, really nice. And the thinness does actually make a difference, I think. I guess the next thing is the sort of M4 chip. And there's probably a lot that could be said about that on a technical level, that some of that I do know about, but I don't think it really matters, right? The bottom line for us is it's going to be faster, which probably is going to mean that things are snappier, things are smoother when you're kind of drawing. Often it means you can use larger brushes, right? So you can use those big airbrushes and you sort of like sweep over and get particular effects without it sort of lagging. That's typically what a processor will provide. Interestingly enough, from my perspective, one of the main things I actually do with iPads and tablets is edit videos, because I'm on YouTube, and if you don't know, YouTubers edit a lot of videos. So I actually have been using DaVinci Resolve on an iPad Pro for quite a while to do quite a bit of editing. That's something that, again, I'll sort of touch on, but doesn't really relate to, the main job I do, which is kind of drawing stuff all day. The other major thing for me was actually the screen. I tend to get pretty excited about screens because I've been doing digital art for a long time. The first screens I used were rubbish, especially the first LCD flat screens, which, meant your eyes didn't start to bleed looking at those big old boxy monitors. That was a major improvement, but it was terrible looking at art. And I think I actually bought the first iPad simply because I knew it would allow me to really look at my art in a very sort of interesting way. And I could actually kind of start to envision this future where comics and other art would actually live primarily on a digital device. And I really believe that is the future. I actually designed the page layout, as you can see, for the core graphic novel that I've been working on for the last few years to fit an iPad screen specifically. You see, this, specifically, right, kind of fits an iPad screen, and I think this is actually a really sort of good, exciting way to view comics and to read things. So the quality of the screen is something that I think is important, both for viewing art and also for making art. And this is an OLED screen, which essentially means you get very dark blacks and you get the ability to have very bright highlights. And I think this is actually really, really important for artists. And it's something that often we don't sort of appreciate that much, I think, because, one screen is the same as another. And you often look at the specifications and it's like, does it matter that it's that much brighter? It is a different experience to really be able to see into the darks that you're creating, to be able to see that sort of wider range. And interestingly enough, I still have to kind of make this comic for print. So I'm kind of thinking, I have to make sure the colors perform quite well when they're printed in CMYK on a normal sort of book. But the thing that I've noticed is the range of colors you can actually get when you're looking at a proper HDR, again, OLED or similar really high-end professional display are really interesting. And I think once we do transition to everyone has amazing OLED screens on everything and we can create content specifically with that higher gamut, it will make a difference. You can do stuff where you're like, wow, I've never seen that color before because it's really bright. And then I kind of realized that that's all out of gamut. It's not going to print. So anyway, that's a little bit sort of, I digress, but for me, the screens are really important. The way that we sort of view art, like this is the way that we see what we're actually doing, and it's important. And, I think that's a major aspect of this for artists. You shouldn't think that you don't need these high specifications or anything like that, or it's sort of too fancy. Again, the world is going to go OLED. It's going to go sort of high dynamic range. And I think if we can start to learn how to create art that way, it's going to be a benefit, right? It's only going to make things better. And I think what's going to be possible is really going to start to blow people's minds in terms of the brightness of color and how you can affect people with color. So anyway, the screen is a major sort of feature. And then we have this it's the Pencil Pro. I can never remember. Every one of these things is called something different. You've got the Wacom, Pro Pen 2, the Samsung S Pen, the Apple. It's a pencil. It's not a pen. This is the Apple Pencil Pro. It looks exactly the same as the other one. It has the haptic, so you kind of squeeze it and it makes a little thing. That's kind of cool. Apparently, you can twist it. We'll see whether or not that makes any difference. So the interesting thing, I guess, from my perspective is somewhat the price, the value proposition of all of this sort of technology and how it gives you utility as an artist to make things. So interestingly enough, I own quite a few of these tablets, and I do that so that I can sort of demonstrate different software, sort of Android, iOS, sort of Windows tablets, and obviously I actually spend most of my time on this workstation you can see kind of behind you here, which is just a PC workstation with a whole bunch of RAM. It's got a fast processor and a lot of storage, a lot of fast storage, because that's actually key for 2D artists. And I've got a big sort of 32-inch sort of Cintiq Pro, and that's what I do most of my work on. So these things have never been something that's a primary sort of tool for me. I know some artists do that, but again, I'm just kind of saying that it's more like a secondary or sort of third device, right? So that's how I tend to use them. But I have been finding I use it more and more. I guess the question is, these things are really expensive now. If you buy the best one, which I did kind of spec this up, I didn't end up going that way because I just wasn't sure, look, honestly, like what this video is about. I wasn't sure like whether it's worth it. But if you buy the keyboard, you buy the pen, you get the fancy kind of etched glass, you get, the most expensive one you can get. It was essentially as expensive as the most expensive PC I've ever bought in my entire life. Which again is the sort of video editing workstation, which is kind of behind me. Again, you can't see it, but that was me basically spending the most I sort of would on consumer grade parts, right? And this was going to be as expensive as that. So it became like a real major purchasing decision. I think this is where these things can creep up on you when you kind of start out and you're sort of younger in high school. And I know a lot of people are like this. It's like, well, you can kind of get a cheap iPad and you can start doing art and, kind of doing some cool coloring and make some interesting things. And that's certainly possible. But then it kind of escalates quickly, right? To the point where now you're paying workstation prices for what is a fairly small screen. And look, it's fast, but it's not that fast. It can't be that fast, right? And we're paying a lot for RAM. We're paying a lot for storage, etc. So I think like the value proposition really is key. So what I'm going to do is just run through the key features and whether or not I think they are any good and they kind of live up to the hype. And after that, I'm going to look at, again, what my expectations were, sort of looking at this thing, looking at all the fancy Apple marketing and thinking like, wow, that'd be really good. That's going to help me. It's going to make me happy. And whether or not after sort of buying it, I still feel that way. Because again, I bought this, I paid my own money for this. I do that for all the sort of products I sort of talk about on the channel. Yeah, like, does it live up? So firstly, the screen, right? When they said it was going to be OLED, this is one of those things. If you're not a screen nerd, it's kind of like, who cares, right? Do we actually need that much brightness? Do we need that many colors? I think this is actually a real thing for artists. And this is where, if we look at that idea of sort of Apple saying, hello, artists, here's a product we made for you. The fact that they are putting the effort into making these screens, I think is something we should appreciate because it honestly does make a difference. The screen fully lives up to expectations. It has that kind of OLED kind of crispness. You can really see the darks. And to me, like instantly, I look at it, I'm like, wow, that's a really good screen. I've looked at a lot of screens in my life for a long time, and I'm pretty good at sort of telling the difference. Again, I'm not like a sort of film home theater nerd or anything like that. But again, I can kind of tell when I'm able to see into the darks of images that I've created on my sort of workstation, which again has like a sort of a decent screen. So it definitely is that, right? There's a crispness to it. There is a contrast to it. There is your ability to kind of, the viewing angles are really good. Again, OLED is just a superior technology. And it just sort of looks really good. So, and you can do that by just, checking out some movies that are in HDR. And I did that, and, they all looked good, right? They all sort of had that sort of high quality OLED look. Again, I have an OLED TV when I'm sort of watching movies and things. And again, it makes a difference from an artist. Again, we're visually literate. We should care about these things. I think the screen is honestly amazing. It's probably, probably one of the most sort of exciting things about it. And it definitely lives up to the hype. I think, again, as I was sort of talking about, this is where I think this product in general is a little bit tricky, because a lot of what we need is we need HDR content to look at it. So if you look at movies, you really appreciate like, oh, wow, this is really good, right? This makes a difference. And I think it is going to take a while for artists to say, no, it's okay to create art. And again, this is something I kind of want to do, to look at like, well, could I make a graphic novel where we really take advantage of the brightness of colors that are possible on a digital device like this? Because in 5 years, probably most of Apple's products might be OLED, right? A lot of stuff is going OLED. The Samsung Galaxy S9 Ultra that I have as well, which is an Android tablet, that has an AMOLED screen. And again, it looks good. And I think we should start to look at how we can leverage creating content on these devices and the different things that allows us in terms of vibrancy of colors, just the range of colors you can have, and the contrast that we can create. It is going to cause a bit of trouble for people, because if you create an image where you're taking advantage of that and then you print it, it will not print well, right? If you're trying to print a graphic novel or something like that, and you be like, oh, look at all the darks and the lights, that all goes away. So it's important to understand good illustration principles here, and still make images that are going to work. But I think, again, it's a really interesting insight, I think. Let me know in the comments down below into how technology is actually going to allow us to do really interesting things. And you can imagine in the future, potentially also the way we might display larger images on screens that are, sort of on the wall, and we'll be able to sort of view stuff. A lot of it's going to go HDR, a lot of it's going to go sort of high res. And I think as digital artists, that's something we should appreciate. And this is a great product, right? The OLED screen, they've done some stuff with it. It looks really, really, really good. Next thing, I guess, is the M4 processor, right? And again, there's a lot of sort of drama about this, right? It has more AI features. Everyone wants to have AI in everything because, it makes the share price go up. Number goes up with AI at the moment. Apple have had sort of neural stuff in their chips for ages. And I think, again, this is another one of those things where, like, the tech's there, the hardware's there, the software is probably not there yet, but it should allow some more interesting and better selection, right? An ability to kind of use sort of machine learning and sort of other algorithms to create sort of better filters and other things like that for digital art programs. Right now, right, it's probably just a little bit faster, right? That's probably the best way to sort of explain it. But certainly, it is appreciably faster. So one of the things I kind of do that I can kind of tell is on my M1 iPad Pro, if I edit a video in DaVinci Resolve, it still sort of lags a little bit, right? When it's sort of playing different things, where there's the M4 would play that same timeline, and it just kind of like chews through it, right? It's just super smooth. So it is faster. Although actually looking at this comparison, they both seem to be pretty fast. They both seem to be handling this pretty good. The M4 is a little bit smoother, and, I have had some hiccups on the M1, but hey, look, they're both pretty good. None of that software has really been optimized, but it is faster. And Procreate does seem a little bit faster. Obviously, it's going to allow us a little bit more capability. But yeah, for artists, it's like, oh, it's kind of good. But it's probably not going to make that much difference unless you're sort of really pushing the boundaries of what an iPad Pro can do. And again, in that case, it's like you're probably going to find your life is a lot easier just working on your PC workstation, or again, sort of trying to find some other way like that to create larger images with more layers, more complexity, and to sort of do all that stuff. At least that's my sort of personal opinion, right? Because, I come, as I said, from a background of working primarily on a chair, in a desk, on a giant workstation. That's my life. So, the Pencil, the Pencil Pro, it doesn't feel any different to me, right? It really, I could care less, right? All these things are kind of awkward. It still, doesn't have a nice kind of grip. It's still a bit slippery. It's still not like the perfect thing to hold, let's say. It seems like maybe a little bit better than the other one. And having to kind of tap, like now if you kind of tap, you get a haptic feedback. That's good. The rotation's good. But again, for digital artists right now, doesn't seem to be a lot of real features that are actually going to make any difference, right? So again, I think the pencil is another one of these things where it's good to have. There's a few more features, right? It's better. But if you're looking at it from, okay, I have an M2, right, with the Apple Pencil 2 or whatever it was, is this going to allow me to make art in any meaningful way better? I can't see how that's going to happen, right? But I think there's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of interesting things that I think could happen once you sort of really look into this. And this is probably something we'd probably have to dive into in a proper review. But basically, this is kind of where I come at it from, is that fundamentally, and you can see this when you really look at video editing as well, right? Because that's something that's a little bit more, there's more things you kind of have to do. This kind of does replicate drawing, right? It's like, it's a surface, you paint on it. The interface there is kind of, it's pretty natural. And I think that's why it really works for us artists. But, the problem is always speed. People then buy a little keyboard to make, so you can use keyboard shortcuts. And just fundamentally, the interface is super limited, right? It's very tricky to even select like multiple clips on a timeline in DaVinci Resolve, for instance, because you don't have like, you can't sort of like shift click on things. I think adding like rotation and haptic feedback is the start of potentially, again, creating some more interface interaction possibility where you can use gestures and rotation to like create some interesting selections on menus and stuff. And again, you may know more about this than me, or like someone's done that and, yes, that's in here. But again, I'm just like buying this thing. I open up Procreate and I'm like, I'm going to draw some stuff. Like, is there any difference? Like, not really. The idea of sort of haptics, right? Like three-dimensional rotational interface possibilities. The idea of sort of VR, Vision Pro, and like, this is all stuff where like the possibility is really interesting, but the utility is just not there, right? It's like, it's just awkward to wear these big glasses. Like unless someone actually figures out a way to utilize this and make a killer app or a killer interface, then it's just kind of more meaningless tech that doesn't really make a difference. But I think there is a possibility here for how to potentially in the future overcome some of the limitations of not having a keyboard. And if you think about combining sort of interesting haptics, again, three-dimensional rotation, and maybe voice commands of some kind, like it is possible to envision a future where you can sort of ditch this giant thing with the keyboard and all that kind of stuff and maybe just use this for everything, right? The power is there. The biggest limitation at the moment for me is just the interface and living up to that possibility of like, okay, I've just got this and I've just got this. Can I make anything, right? Like that to me is the promise. And I think the biggest challenge is that people need to like, we add a second display, we add like, keyboards, and we add screen. It kind of like, just buy a workstation. If you're going to do all that stuff, just buy a workstation. But I think there is a possibility with a lot of this technology to envision a future where it is just a pencil and it is just a pen, and maybe your second screen is some retinal projection sort of, VR thing. And you can just kind of sit on the couch and do everything because the power, a lot of it's there. A lot of the pieces are there, but yeah, anyway, that's all fantasy because at the moment it's exactly the same as the other pencil. Anyway. All right. So what about, again, as I was saying, expectations? You're sitting there thinking, is this thing worth it? Should I buy it, basically? So for me, again, the major expectations were that the OLED would be amazing, right? And I'm like, yes, it is. To me, if I sort of look at all my devices, this is the one that I'm going to be hanging around and carrying with me, because the screen is just amazing. And if I was to kind of take one device with me, sort of on the road, which sometimes I do a little bit of work while I'm on the road, etc., this is it. You can watch movies, you could read comics, you can make art. The screen is amazing, right? It's one of the best screen experiences you can get. It's freaking amazing. Totally love it. All that sort of fancy Apple marketing where like, we got two OLED screens. I don't care, right? It looks good. For me, definitely that alone for me personally is worth the price of entry. Again, just for example, looking at the comic that I made, the Star Atlas Core comic, this is the best reading experience of it that I've had so far. Just the idea of being able to see it. I can see, I know these pages intimately, the amount of detail, the texture there. This sort of allows me to read and appreciate that more than any other device on Earth. So I guess the other thing is I'm expecting it to be super fast, right? And it's kind of interesting because I have like an Android tablet, I have Windows tablets, I have a big sort of workstation, and I actually have, as I said, an M1 iPad Pro that I kind of bought in the middle of this. And I bought this secondhand, which might be something that's interesting and worth talking about in the end, right? How does it compare to like a secondhand old iPad Pro, right? But the key thing here is that this thing's pretty fast. This thing does a lot. I was able to edit a lot of videos on this. And the iPad Pro is the M4 is faster, but is it more like actually faster? I think we haven't really seen how fast it is yet. If you just kind of look at, you just open up all the apps and kind of see how it's faster. I can see from my workflow, I can see situations where I'm like, this is worth having and spending extra money on, because now when I'm looking at videos and I can kind of preview them, it doesn't jitter. I don't drop frames. And that is actually important because sometimes you miss things. So these are the kind of things that I'm looking for, right? Like, is there some actual tactile reason why you would upgrade and the speed makes a difference? I think it does, but I don't think we've really seen it, or I haven't seen it when I'm just kind of opening up Procreate and just sort of drawing or sort of looking at illustrations. For instance, I often try this, and I've been trying this since the first kind of, sort of iPad Pro was available. I open up a comic book page or a large illustration that I've done on a PC workstation, which, is a Photoshop document. You try and load it into Procreate or something, and it often just kind of says, we can't do this. This exceeds the device's capabilities. And still, for most of the images that I try and load into it, I just won't open them up. They're too big, too many layers, too high res. It just can't handle it, right? It's too slow. Although it's worth mentioning that is in Procreate. And I did manage to get some big Photoshop files, comic book pages, large concept illustrations, etc. to open up in Clip Studio. So they did open up, although obviously the file conversion is not perfect. There's a lot of layers that don't work from Photoshop to Clip Studio. That's not really the point, but they did open, and the brushes were still pretty responsive, which was kind of interesting. I was able to use a big airbrush over the top of one of those illustrations, and it was kind of working. It's pretty impressive. Although I did get a lot of memory warnings, and just in general, it was a little bit laggy, kind of zooming around, right? So it was kind of usable, kind of not, but again, sort of impressive that you can open up one of these kind of 1 gigabyte files and it does kind of work. So I'm sure if you were using Clip Studio, you might be able to sort of get some of that stuff to work. And I'm also sure that, if you started your file in Procreate, build it up that way, you'd be able to get a really complicated illustration going. So again, there's a lot of advantages to it, but I think if you're just and again, that doesn't really matter if you're just a pure iPad artist, but I think it's probably going to take some of the software people to catch up with the extra sort of neural stuff they have in it, the machine learning style chips they have in it, to maybe increase the the way that selections or something that's actually going to make a difference for us works. And it's kind of just faster, but it may actually get a lot more faster once people are able to kind of get more out of the hardware. I don't know, but again, it's faster. It's not really going to make much difference to me. And lastly, I guess, my expectation of this pencil wasn't that high. But, I was sort of hoping that, maybe it would be different or better in some way. It's a little bit disappointing that it's kind of exactly the same form factor, right? And again, there's not some way to, make it sort of easier to hold, or, one of the frustrating things is, again, putting grips on it, making sure that it still works with the charging, etc. But the technology, like maybe it's a little bit better. I'm not sure. But, again, I'm very kind of meh on the pencil, right? If this was like a real sort of thing, again, from my perspective, just sort of firing stuff up, messing around in Procreate, trying to draw. Yeah, it's a bit of a wash. So I guess the other thing that may be an expectation is the thinness, the lightness of it. Now, you may be kind of wondering, like, does that matter? Like, is it really a big deal? Why do they make it thinner? Also, you might be wondering, as I was kind of touching on, like, is it going to be flimsy, right? Is it going to be weak because it's thin? And I don't know what they have done to this thing, but again, it feels super, super rigid, super strong. But yeah, the reason they do these things is because of competition, right? So the interesting thing is, you have like a, sort of iPad Pro. This is an 11-inch, right? And I think this is I think it's 5.9 millimeters thick or thin. This is a Samsung S9 Ultra, and this is 5.4 millimeters thick. And this one is 5.1 millimeters thick. And I think the only reason they really sort of tried to do that was, like, obviously it's better, but also competition. This thing is noticeably thinner than like a previous generation iPad, the Samsung Ultra. It feels thinner. You pick it up and you're like, oh, this is thin. This is nice. Does it make any difference? Once you kind of look at it, I mean, honestly, you can't tell the difference. If you put them on a table, you can't tell the difference, right? You can barely tell any difference. It's kind of ridiculous, the whole thing. But there is something to, like, feeling it and you're like, oh, that is thinner. And mostly it's when you put it in a case, right? They've made the cases thinner. The whole thing is just a little bit thinner. There's something weird about buying one of these thin things and then kind of jamming it in a case and the whole thing gets chunky again. Putting a case on this, right? So much the case is like a millimeter, so the whole thing is like as thick as, the old iPad. It does just kind of make it a little bit sort of nicer. But again, this is the ultimate kind of like first world problems, right? It's like, is this thing like a millimeter thicker or whatever? So yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that the reason you can tell, like the 11-inch one, they made 5.3 millimeters thick. And I think, honestly, it's just one of these sort of tech games they play to try and make things thinner, right? Because that's thinner than the 5.4 millimeter Samsung one, so therefore it's better. I'm assuming that's why. But it does make it lighter. It is nice and thin. That is really good. I don't know whether it makes a huge difference to anyone really, but yeah, it is noticeably thinner. It looks really good. Mostly, again, that's the rigidity of it. I actually think is a lot better than some of the previous ones. So anyway, don't need to worry about that. It's probably not going to make any difference, but it is nicer. And again, it does, show that they are making sort of progress with some of these technologies. Would it be better to just put a bigger battery in it? I don't know. Okay, so that's kind of, I guess, a good way of me explaining what I was thinking about it and, whether or not it lives up to that hype. Hopefully, let me know in the comments down below whether that helps you with your purchasing decision or not. What I want to do now is just like a quick overview and really sort of give you my sort of closing thoughts on, do I think this is actually worth buying right now? I think that is the fundamental question. It's great. It's amazing, right? It's one of these things where a lot of people get really down on technology because often it's expensive and versus the previous generation, it's like not as good or whatever. There's a lot of politics here. If you just look at this thing as a device, as an object, this is amazing that A, they created this. That B, it is something like, if you're considering buying this, the fact that you can buy this thing is amazing. Again, the pencil is kind of started to catch up, right? It's at a point now where you're looking, like the first generation Apple Pencil, which I think I actually have one here, right? This whole thing, right? like with this nonsense, like this utter nonsense, right? This thing's good, right? It is like, oh, no. You can see that they've been putting in the work, right? This thing is really amazing. OLED screen, it's super fast. You can make awesome art on it. The pencil is, it has a lot of features. There's extra fidelity. It's a little bit better. This thing is amazing. There's no question, right? As an artist, should you have one of these? Sure, right? Absolutely. It's amazing. The question is, like, they're pretty expensive, right? Is it worth it? And where does it kind of sit in terms of a purchasing decision? Right now, should you buy a secondhand older one? Should you buy a Android device? Because again, like, honestly, if you're just into art, a lot of the platform stuff doesn't matter. You're just working in one program. Like, who cares whether or not you can get different apps on the App Store or any of that other stuff? So again, let's look at it from a 50,000 foot view. So as I kind of said, if we look at it from the object point of view, like, is this a good thing? The answer is yes. I think like for artists, yes. It feels like this thing is made for artists. It feels like technology companies actually care about artists. Again, forget the funny ads and they're kind of like not reading the room and stuff like that. I mean, look, if you haven't realized that, Apple is going to be sort of super expensive and often kind of, cut you out and make your life tricky, it's like, okay, right? It's a slightly abusive relationship buying Apple stuff, right? It's kind of amazing, but also, right? But again, as an object, right? If you think about like, forget all that, just look at the people making the technology and giving us this thing to make art with. It's amazing, right? Like absolutely amazing. If you look at it from a progress standpoint, again, I think it's also pretty good. We're getting, for the first time, some actual speed, right? The first time they put an M4 chip in something, I mean, again, it sort of says that, that this isn't just a second class product. And, the OLED screen is genuinely good, right? From a technological standpoint, it's good. And also just sort of putting it in here, not really raising the price a huge amount. It's good. Again, they're adding features to the, thing, to the Pencil Pro. They're making it thinner. Progress is good, right? If you look at this versus like the previous generation, this is a definite improvement. And again, I think that bodes well in general for us artists receiving technology, because we don't always get it, right? Often these things stagnate, right? Wacom technology for a long time just was not going anywhere. It's like 10 years, like, what can you give me something? Right? They're like, no, right? We just buy the same old thing. So I think it is good there's competition here. And again, I like the fact that they're competing to see which one is the thinnest. Yeah, so again, I think it sort of bodes well that there's a little bit of energy here. The progress is definitely there. This is for sure better than the M2 one. Although I don't actually own the M2 version, I've got the M1 sort of version here. And again, the next thing I think is looking at is, what is the utility of it, right? Because we're artists. I'm an artist. I'm a professional artist. And although it's kind of nice to have like, oh, this is technology, it's fancy, I think fundamentally it's important to not get caught up in tech lust and sort of FOMO and letting these corporations and people who make this technology try and sort of validate our artistic, self and really sort of imagine that like having this one or any of them is really going to make any difference to how good of an artist you are and whether or not you can create great images, right? We're always made to feel that way. Like, okay, now here's the new thing, and this is where all the creatives are, right? And it's like, well, what about the last one? You said these were really good a couple of years ago, and everyone made a lot of good art on this. So why do we have to have the new one, right? To sort of validate our, vision of ourselves as a creative. So fundamentally, these are tools, right? In 10 years, this will all be landfill. It'll be junk. The battery will probably be like puffing out and, complete mess. This thing for sure, right? These have got batteries in them. These are not lasting forever. So eventually this stuff is just going to disappear. The art we create on it is not. That will hang around. The skills you develop on it, that will hang around. That's what's important. So this is just a tool. That's how I view it. I don't care, right? If it can give me more utility and I can justify the price, I'll buy it. So, versus another tool, right? Again, this is an M1 iPad Pro. This is the 1 terabyte version. So it's got 16 gigs of RAM. So in some ways, this one might be faster than this one. And I got this secondhand on eBay, and it was really well looked after. It's sort of amazing. And this was probably about half the price of the other one. And it's great. So, and I can create art on that. Is it worth it versus that? Like, probably, I would say the screen really does make it something special. But, this had a good screen too. And I honestly think if like money is a concern, there's probably a lot of M1 iPad Pros that are gonna, come up that, you could probably buy if you don't already sort of have one of those. If you're thinking like, maybe I should do this, for sketching. Maybe I should sort of have one of these things as like a second or a third device. Secondhand M1 iPad Pro, I think, is probably like a great way to just sort of buy it and see and not invest all of this kind of money into something where, quite frankly, I don't think you're seeing right now today on launch the real sort of abilities of it come to play, right? So again, like that's kind of how I would sort of look at it in terms of utility, like versus M1, or again, even sort of versus like a Android Samsung product, right? At the end of the day, they all allow us to do digital art, and they're all pretty powerful these days, right? As long as you're in that sort of pro range thing, right? Got a little bit more RAM, fast stuff, the pens work pretty well. Yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's not really going to add that much utility. And that really sort of brings me to the last thing, which is the value, right? Which is really kind of the bottom line. Yes, it's good to kind of imagine how some, fancy OLED screen and all this stuff is really going to make a big difference. But fundamentally, it's a matter of value. Like, how does it compare to other things? And I think that's where the real problem I have with it is I feel like it's good, it's fast, it's amazing, but I don't know whether we're really seeing the sort of full effect of it right now. And that really, matters, because you can often get these on discount, or you can maybe have to get them secondhand in a year or so. Maybe some of those sort of extra features in the pen, software will have maybe squeezed a little bit more power out of that hardware. And it's really hard to sort of recommend like right now, unless you just kind of have, enough money to just, unless it's like not a consideration, right? If you're just like, oh, should I get it? I'm like, oh yeah, cool, the screen's good. If you're like, oh, cool, I'll buy one, click. If you're that person, it's like, yeah, cool, it's amazing. If you're, if this is a real consideration in terms of sort of money, I'm like, I think you could wait a year and you'll probably get it cheaper and your experience with it will be better, right? You could easily buy this and wait for a year for some of these features to sort of properly come online and actually be sort of utilized. And again, I think you do have to compare it to an M1, secondhand one, or, other products, right? Again, these Samsung products often, from my experience in Australia, these often go on sale a lot more. So you can get them a lot sort of cheaper. And again, this thing has an AMOLED screen. This thing is 14.1 inches. Like, drawing on this is amazing. Again, this feels a little bit snappier, but again, at the end of the day, we're artists. No one's going to care how snappy it was. They're only going to care whether or not the art looks good. So I'd say bottom line is, if you've been hanging out for this and you sort of haven't upgraded to the M2 or maybe even the M1 and you're like, like I like iPads, but is this actually better? Like, this is upgrade time. This thing is amazing. It's significantly better than the others. And, I think there's a lot of sort of utility to the speed, if you can find some way to utilize it. And bottom line is, just for me, like, the screen is really just sort of good, right? It really is sort of useful. But, if the money is a concern at all, I think one of the real things is, like, you kind of do want the extra RAM if you're a 2D artist. And these things are really expensive once you start to get up there. So I think you really have to have, at that point, the money or some real utility, right? To be like, this is my primary workstation or something. So yeah, it's kind of awesome, but I'd say that there's other stuff that's probably going to be much, much better value. And a lot of that tech is really, really good. We got lots of options now. So yeah, anyway, let me know in the comments what you think, whether you're thinking of buying this, whether this review has been helpful. I apologize for all the sort of rambling and side tangents, but that's normally how I roll. So anyway, thanks for watching. Happy drawing.